La la la.
All right.
It says starting. Failed to go live.
It says
Yeah.
live to
It
me.
says live in the top right.
Hmm.
Let me check the actual website.
Going live. There you go. There it worked. I got an error on my side. Can you hear the printer?
Yeah.
No, I can't.
Not too bad. All right, cool. Cool. We have one viewer. Oh.
It's
So
me. It's actually me. The one viewer was me.
Yeah? Okay.
I just closed it.
Cool. All right. Oh, hey, remember last week I was working on my robot?
Prime, yeah.
Yeah,
You got fingers still?
I got, let me see how I can, there we go. So I got his body, and I had to buy tweezers, though, to like, do this.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
And the old man glasses. So this is how much is left.
Oh, wow. Okay, you're coming along.
So, yeah. You know the thing that I'm starting to realize, though, and I don't know if you've ever had this issue with hobbies and stuff, is like, what's the value in this?
There isn't any.
You know
the
what I'm
value
saying?
is you enjoy doing it.
I don't know. I should be coding.
Well, then, code?
Well, that project's over here.
Well, just to use your analogy, like, yeah, you only have so many keystrokes left in your life.
No, I know.
So,
I burned 2 hours on this yesterday, and there's
Exactly.
no value at all, and I don't know why I did it. And I only have so much time, but apparently I'm an old man with a tiny hobby now.
Apparently. Just to update you on the thing I was complaining about last time. So, my technology status: love my phone. I am Team Android. Totally Team Android.
I can't believe you're Team Android.
Love it.
It's such a sloppy operating system.
Have you used 6? Have you used like the latest one on a Nexus 6P? I mean, you haven't lived with it.
The only thing that I've done is I've gone and found. I went and I caressed Samsung Galaxy Edge for a moment.
I love it. It's beautiful. Like I can't even pinpoint one thing that I'm not happy. The only thing that annoys me is it's a little sensitive on its landscape rotation, such that when I put it down, it often flips the landscape when I put it on the table. That is the worst thing that's happening.
Yeah. That's because of the way that's the Earth's. That's the Earth's.
So actually, just quick technology at this point. But my Surface, unfortunately, has gone backwards again, and I'm just having.
My Surface updated a couple of days ago, and it's been butter ever since. I haven't had any Surface issues at all.
Oh, your Surface Book?
My Surface Book updated, and I've had no issues that I can think of. Although I don't stand by it anymore. I hibernated.
Oh, really? You made that change?
I went to the power options. I scrolled down. Put hibernate in the power options, and I manually hibernate. Is that cheating? That's called.
Obviously it's broken. That's what everyone's doing to make it work. Well, I'm having the same issue on my Surface Pro 3. So like, it just won't go to sleep. I put it in. I go home. It's hot.
There's something definitely wrong. I totally agree. Something's wrong.
Anyway.
All right. People are asking questions, and I'm deleting them as fast as I can. Well, someone's asking about my haircut. I'm like.
Oh, do we do the links first or after? Can I run those?
Oh, you want to do those first, as opposed to talking about hair?
John loves community.
John doesn't want to talk about hair. I wonder why.
Oh, I didn't know if that went into the question segment.
Hang on, I need to make my forehead smaller. All right, go ahead. Share your screen, sir.
Oh, all right. Sharing. All right. You got it? Okay.
Yeah.
So I got 2 at the beginning here. This is 2 static documentation generators. This is Franz Bohm's one. This is full .NET Framework 4.6, but kind of neat. This is something he just launched. And I thought this was kind of neat. Here's another one. This is a DocFX is a documentation generator for .NET Core. So kind of neat to see both of those side by side. Here's ASP.NET Monsters. I hadn't mentioned this before, and this is really cool. It's a show that David Paquette, James Chambers, and Simon Timms are doing. So they're up to show 7, I believe, already. So this is a weekly show, and they're just going through and doing all kinds of cutting-edge ASP.NET Core stuff. So neat. I've featured James several times. All these guys are amazing. This is so really exciting to see this.
Okay.
So Doug Ludlow has a tutorial. This is Angular 2, JSPM, and ASP.NET. So I'm excited about this for a few reasons. JSPM is a nice experience sometimes compared to NPM, but not as well documented actually how to do that. And then Angular 2 as well. There's not quite as much documented stuff out there on Angular 2 with ASP.NET Core, so nice to see an up-to-date one that's just came out. This is Powell did this thing on the new toolchain for .NET, so he's just talking about .NET CLI. Mm-hmm. So this is specifically .NET CLI related, but nice walkthrough there. Here's a course from John Papa and Shane Boyer. So this is on Pluralsight, but it's a play-by-play. So those play-by-plays are really, it's a cool series, and then John and Shane are both amazing, so excited to see that. There's a ton of events going on right now. One, if you happen to be in the Glasgow area, I believe there's still space for this. So this is the Microsoft Web Platform Day. And Martin and Christos are all really great. So if there's space, get in. Mark Brend doing something on Vue components and ASP.NET Core. So he's done a lot of great stuff over the years, showing like ASP.NET web pages and stuff. So neat to see his views on Vue components. There's no post on this, but this Smidge thing is a bundler. So this is a .NET Core focused bundler.
That's a cool name.
It is, yeah. So this is kind of like the bundling minification thing. This is his implementation of it for .NET Core. And finally, here we've got, I featured something from Matthew Perry. I believe it's Matthew Perry. Let's scroll.
He was in Friends. No?
Matthew Jones. See, that was what I got wrong. So Matthew Jones, I featured something on him.
I've got something from Monica if we want to go over that, and Chandler did something as well.
Can we dub in the music? So Matthew wrote up another cool thing. I featured something on him in a previous one. So here he's continuing the series and looking at custom middleware. Excellent stuff. Now you can fade out the theme music.
Cool.
And, all right.
Shiny. So we can best do questions, but one of the questions was a good question for you, Damien, which is what's happened in the last 2 weeks?
So just to reinforce that I'm on Team Android, my Google Cardboard has just been delivered at home. So I'm going to look forward to playing with that when I get home.
I think it's important that we point out that you're in the ASP.NET team room right now, and you have a gavel.
Yes.
Oh. Yeah, but you're wielding it like a pipe.
Yeah,
like Gandalf's pipe there.
I think the other part. There we go. So we have a...
And that is for hitting people when they don't agree with Fowler?
There's a backstory about this. I think it was specifically to do with security review meetings, where the person who was running the meeting and saying this thing needs to be looked at from a security point of view could stop engineers from saying, no, that doesn't matter, or no, this is fine, because they're not the ones who get to make that call. So it was, okay, no, the decision has been made, we need to do X, Y, and Z. So now it just lives in here, and it's fun to pick up.
Nice little Robert's Rules of Order there. And then another question worth asking is sometimes when we turn on cameras, as we do at the Microsoft, people are not looking at us, they're looking behind us at our stuff. I see a bunch of Post-it notes on the wall there. Are those important and or secret?
You don't see any Post-it notes here. What are you talking about? I don't know.
Is there anything useful there? Should we zoom in on any of that? Is that useful? You have a zoom feature.
I think specifically this is used by the tooling team, the people who build the ASP.NET tooling in Visual Studio, because they're also in this room, who are now building the tooling for the .NET CLI. It's really, I mean, Kudu publish. I actually don't know if this is up to date. I don't know if they use this day to day. I'm not sure they do. So there's nothing particularly interesting on there. It's all pretty boring.
Okay, there's no secrets or anything we should.
I'm going to sneak some Easter egg ones up there next time.
I see hi Scott. That's all I see.
There will be a test. Oh yeah, it actually does say hi Scott.
Yeah.
Right. So what's been happening? Lots of stuff. Unfortunately, I'm no closer to giving you an update on the TBD, on dates or anything like that. We're still working through issues and working through top-level sort of blocking designs and things like that we have to sort out before we're comfortable in giving people a date. for whatever the next release will be. That's just the reality of where we are. As we said, we would tell you when we were ready, and we would be reassessing week to week. I can tell you we had a very large meeting this morning that went for about 5 hours, and it involved various managers from various levels across all teams involved with this, which was a very sort of open discussion, get everyone in the room, let's talk about where we're at, what's left, and we've got a bunch of new data, and we have a bunch of new timelines for getting more data and finalizing on decisions that will then let us make an estimate as to when we'll be ready.
So let me ask you this, because my job apparently is to play devil's advocate, although
Indeed.
I have postulated that the devil, in fact, does not need an advocate. When you say stuff like that, I can only assume that the community thinks like, well, hey, how hard can it be? Like, what do you guys are basically done. Is it all the little tiny things? Is it just like is it a bunch of little small things, or is it like big architectural, like, oh, no one thought about foo? What about foo?
So, first of all, who were you impersonating exactly when
I
you
have
said...
no idea who that was.
Okay.
Yeah, Columbo.
Yeah, oh, it's Columbo. Okay.
Sorry to bother you, but why haven't you shipped yet?
That sounds more like Dimitri.
No, Dimitri says to me, don't blame Anders for your bad design.
Yeah, that sounds like Dimitri. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, there's still some big things that we never actually properly solved with DNX because we punted them when we realized we were moving to the .NET Core CLI, which, guess what? Now we have to actually do the work to design and solve.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. So really nailing down how this thing will version. After we ship a 1.0, what happens when 1.01 comes out? What happens if we only have to patch the .NET XE or one of the tools, but we don't have to patch the runtime? What if we just have to patch the runtime? What if just the CLI has to be patched? What if the jitter has a bug, but the APIs don't change? Like, all those things, and ensuring that we have the correct, acquisition experience, global versus user local. What happens when I'm doing local dev with the SDK and then I push up to a server that doesn't have the SDK, but it does have a read dist? What's in the read dist versus the SDK? What about build servers? What do you install in your build server to build these things? What happens when you're in Kudu doing source control deployment? Is that the same tools that you use? All those type of things. And they have very large ripple effects. So it's not just that we need to make all those decisions. We then need to assess, when we've made the decision, what the ripple effects are for the things, as it goes out through the ecosystem. So all I can say is that obviously we wish we could be done sooner, as does anyone who's building a large thing. But as we've said a few times, we want to make sure we do it right. We'd rather do it right than do it early. And so we need to make these design choices first and solve these problems before we can be confident giving people, hey, this is when the next release is going to be at this quality, and you can bank on that to some degree of accuracy. I think it's fair to say that, I mean, if we were going to talk ballparks, because usually the first question asked, and I do this to people all the time, right? So, well, is it 10 years? No, it's going to be sooner than 10 years. It'll be sooner than 5 years, and it'll be this year. Like, let's be frank. We're not talking about it's going to be next year. It'll be this year. We're not ready to go any more granular than that just yet. Talk to me again next week, and then maybe it'll be the week after, or maybe the week after. When I say we're taking it week to week, I really mean we're taking it week to week.
Right. There's no like secrets.
There's no secrets, and like I said, the big first step is really listing out those known unknowns. What are the big things that we have yet to agree on with a designer that we want to do it, and then B, how we're going to do it, so that we can then go off and start doing it to validate those first two things.
So what's the difference between what we see publicly in a GitHub issue versus the kinds of things that get argued about in big 5-hour meetings with bosses many levels up?
So GitHub issues are actually a terrible way of getting an overall sense of where something is at, obviously, because if someone was to come to you and say, oh, so I hear about this .NET Core thing, where should I go to learn about that? And you pointed them at GitHub, like at the 2 or 3 repos, and said, go and read all the issues, I mean, that's obviously you wouldn't tell people.
But a gentleman just made the point. Are these open issues that Damien enumerated, and you listed out a bunch of random issues, but are all important? He said, are they documented anywhere? And that's kind of the underlying question.
Not all of them, and that's one of the problems. So
they are, like you said, they're not known until they were enumerated in that large meeting.
So many of these things are known unknowns, and they're unknown because we haven't written them down. We haven't even on some of them agreed and defined what the scenario is that we're trying to hit. We know we've talked about them numerous times, and we are working through this very actively right now to ensure that all of these get recorded so that we can iterate on them, agree upon them, and then go off and build them. So you will see issues that pertain to some aspects of the things that that I just mentioned. But one of the things I want to be able to achieve within the next week is to be able to point people at 3 or 4 foundational documents. They say, hey, you want to know what we're doing? Go and read these 4 docs. And they will explain what .NET Core CLI is and what's in it and how you'll get it. The .NET Core project model. What's the project JSON file? Why do I need it? What can I put in there? Well, how do the commands read that and what does that do? What can I build using a .NET Core project? What is this thing called .NET Standard Library that I've heard about? Where will I see that in packages? How do I reason about it? What API is in it? What does it mean to my applications? Do I have to reference it? And the .NET Platform Standard, what is that? Why do we need it? How does the standard library relate to the platform standard? Why do I have to pick a platform standard when I'm compiling? Those are really the big 4 deliverables with what we're shipping. And then ASP.NET builds on top of that. And so those 4 foundational concepts are what we really need to nail down in the next week. So that I could point someone who has a moderate understanding of what .NET is, I could point them at these things and they go, oh, okay, I understand what's being built right now. And then they would be able to go and see GitHub issues that relate to these 4 sort of overarching concepts. So
it's part of the reason, like, obviously you need to have good documentation for projects to be successful and all that, but is part of that, like, writing them out just to have them agreed on? Like,
yep.
What is .NET Standard? Get everyone to agree this is the doc.
It's a big part of it. I mean, to be fair, there's been a little bit. I think there's probably been a little bit of when we made the decision to switch from DNX to Core CLI, there was a body of known work. Okay, so we started on that known work. 2 teams, .NET and us, and then VS and NuGet and those things. And I think it's taken as long as it's taken a couple of months to get to the point where we are now, where large bulk of what was running on DNX is now running on the CLI. And so one part of it is working through issues that has uncovered, okay? Because some things that were in DNX aren't in the CLI. They've been replaced by other things like commands to tools. And then there is going back now and solving some of the issues that we never did solve with DNX because they were postponed as part of this move to .NET Core CLI. And so those 2 things together really, I think, represents where we are right now. The stability of the Core CLI, the engineering, the builds, those type of things has not been great. It's getting a lot better now. Obviously, if those things aren't great, then there's a very real ripple effect that, if the very core thing isn't reliable, that is, you can't get a build today which has a fix in it for an issue that you found 2 days ago, and it's blocking you, that obviously slows the entire system down. So we're working very hard to just get that engineering quality up so that we can then unblock issues, discover design issues, agree on design issues, then do implementation, just get that sort of nice, well-lubricated engineering process working again. And a lot of this, again, if we weren't doing this in the open and we weren't fully open source, you wouldn't have seen any of this stuff, right? Like, this would have just been stuff that happens internally, and maybe the only thing that we would have announced is, hey, we are slipping the release of RTM. And if you think back to Visual Studio 2010, that's exactly what happened. They did a beta release of 2010, then decided that the performance wasn't up to scratch, and they did somewhat of an internal reset, and that manifested itself publicly as just a slip to the Visual Studio 2010 RTM timeline. Rather than doing an RC and then an RTM, they sort of paused and they added a bunch of months so that they had time to go through and do a full sweep to fix a bunch of the performance issues. So it's not like these things don't happen, it's just that we're doing it a lot more openly than we have in the past, which I've apologized for.
And while it might seem like chaos to the people that are watching, and there are people in the active .NET and ASP.NET community who are very negative right now, and they think that this is just awful because they can see the sausage being made, and wow, sausage is gross, and I don't ever want to eat sausage again. There's only 225 people on this call, not the several million .NET developers. So
Yeah,
for
it's
a
true.
lot of people, this will simply present itself as like, oh, there's a new release of ASP.NET.
Yeah, talk about the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean,
Seriously, this is 200 people. We love you all,
Yep.
except for the ones that keep putting questions up that we're not going to be able to answer because they're too many.
Yeah.
You know what I
And
mean?
even if you expand that audience to the people who watch on YouTube, maybe 5,000, right, at most, from an audience of 2 or 3 million.
As
So,
I'm thinking through this, I mean, this stuff is all vital and core stuff, but a lot of this is mechanics that's hidden to the app dev who's going to do file new project and build an MVC app.
Yep.
Like it's all got to work, but
Yep.
not a whole lot necessarily changes from what they see.
Right.
Cool. Let's bang through some of these questions because there's a ton. Blah, blah, blah. So this is a follow-up on the open source question. If this is to be truly open source, there needs to be transparency in a place where these issues are documented. Yes, we agree. This is me saying that. I appreciate the candor. Remember, there are people who make decisions now on whether or not this is worth it. Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, once you get a date, a way to deal with the churn is to just back up. And once you have a date, then you can make your kind of decisions and stuff.
Yep.
When we say yes, this is going to RTM, that means you're going to have full support. You're going to file a new project in Visual Studio, and you're going to be able to code your brains out. And but if you're trying to go daily builds, you're going to be sending your steak back into the kitchen to get cooked a little bit more,
yep.
Which is overwhelming. At NDC London, you guys showed everything would be in a console soon, even web apps.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. I'm worried when I think about porting our solutions, which have a lot of sites. When I hit F5, will I get 10 console windows?
Only if you set them all to start up as console apps. So if you're in Visual Studio and you're using IIS, you don't see the console app. Like when you launch, it launches IIS Express.
Right. So you have a bunch of DLLs. They get loaded in, right? If you have a bunch of class libraries, the one thing fires up as a console app, and the other ones get loaded up into that.
No,
right?
It depends. So if you mean, I think he explicitly said he had more than one website project.
Yeah, that's a good point. Solutions with lots of sites.
Yeah. So if they're all running via IIS Express, then we don't. When you launch those in Visual Studio, it doesn't launch a command window for that. That's not how it works. IIS Express is launched, which has a sys tray, just like it does today.
Mm.
And if you have 5 of those, you get 1 sys tray and 4 entries in the list that comes up. And then they all in turn launch your application, which is a console app. But you don't see a console window for those. You only see a console window if you launch your app directly. That is, you don't use IIS Express in front of it.
Cool. So it's like marking a project as startup or going into the config and saying these are the 2 websites or the 4 websites or whatever that I want to fire up.
Well, yeah. It's just like as if you had 5 console apps today, except it's more like you had 5 web apps where they were all running in IIS. You don't see the console windows.
Okay. What is the status of ASP.NET Identity for core? Do we bet on Identity Server 4 and open source project?
Yes. So it depends on what you mean. So ASP.NET has its own identity system, which is specifically to do with membership, like user accounts and the security middleware for auth against OAuth and social auth providers. Then we have the OpenID Connect middleware for authoring against things like Azure AD. Identity Server is about issuing identity tokens. So if you're building a web API, and you want to authorize that with tokens of some description, which is what we'd suggest, then yes, Identity Server would be the way to do that, Identity Server 4. And it also includes user management API UI, as I understand, as well, which we will not have user management. Do we? No, we don't. We don't have user management UI as part of our identity system. There's a self-serve UI, so you can manage your password and that type of thing. But Identity Server has the more traditional sort of, I'm an admin and I can see all the users on my system because it is a server of identity.
And one of the things they just announced is in the newer release, it used to be kind of tightly coupled so that they showed all the UI for user management, and they've announced a thing now where it's kind of more broken apart so you can plug your own UI on top of that. Yeah.
Very good.
Cool. All right. If ASP.NET Core is going to be later than expected, will the EF team have more features since there's more time for them?
The EF team is no. I don't think anyone is getting a free ride out of this. Everyone is aligned to the same schedule, and everyone is pretty much being blocked by many of the same things that we're working through. So
okay. Nobody's like, ooh, a week. Let's add 6 new features.
No,
they're getting impacted by the engineering changes under the hood.
Correct.
So,
Right. Oh, someone wanted to know if we're doing this. Can we do the stand-up earlier? Sakeb wants to know if we can do the stand-up earlier because he lives in GMT +1. So
well,
we attempt to do we do it at 10 in the morning, our time, and then we do it in 3 in the afternoon, our time. So every other week, it should not suck for you.
Just that we were out last week, so sorry.
Right, we were out last week. So yes, it's not always at this time, so I'm sorry that you're up late right now. Is SignalR coming before the RTM or after? And I think we determined that would be after.
After. That hasn't changed. So just because we're taking longer doesn't mean we're adding scope. We're taking longer because the scope that we want to deliver, which we'd already said, is we need longer to cook and make sure it's good and correct and the right thing.
Is the thing that was formerly called MVC 6 released on ASP.NET 4.6?
No.
There's a little bit of confusion because a lot of people are thinking we're calling it ASP.NET Core 1. ASP.NET Core is this unified ASP.NET runtime that's going to run on both .NET Core and on the full framework. But then people are extrapolating and thinking that there's now a thing called MVC 6 or Web API. There are subsystems that people historically have used, but we're trying to focus on this one ASP.NET. There isn't an MVC 6, is there?
No, there are packages because everything's in packages.
Right.
And so there is API that is in the MVC namespace, but it is collectively just part of this one big wave of things, which is ASP.NET Core. So in the RCs and the previous betas, we had MVC 6 in that the package version was 6 because it was the same package ID as the previous versions of MVC, which again, it was probably more confusion than was warranted. It was confusing. We shouldn't have done it that way. Which is one of the reasons we did the rename. And so the version of MVC that comes with ASP.NET Core 1 is a version 1. It's MVC 1 for ASP.NET Core 1. But we don't really we don't say it like that. It's just MVC that's in ASP.NET Core.
Cool. Can this project format be used with ASP.NET 4.6 projects?
No.
I like that files don't need to be added to the project file. Nope. That's New World Order. Bower files are stored in www/lib. This causes them to be checked into source control. Yes. So Rob Cannon, I did a blog post about this, as did the web dev blog, and it's 3 lines of code, and you can move that Bower files out of www.root, put them anywhere that makes you happy. I've got a blog post about that. So just look for Google with Bing for moving the Bower files in ASP.NET. When hosting ASP.NET Core in IIS, will it be hosted inside of W3WP, or will W3WP have child processes hosting the core CLI?
Child processes. So that's been that way since Beta 8. That change was made a long time ago.
That's using the web platform handler, and I've got details on that on my blog. HTTP platform handler, pardon me.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Console windows. How about finally integrating console windows into VS? Wasn't there talk?
Out of scope. Out
of scope of this. To be clear, out of scope of ASP.NET. But there's the package manager console. There's the new REPL stuff. I heard that there was some talk about coming up with some reconciled console, but not anytime soon.
Right.
What is the plan for supporting things like Oracle DB when building a cross-platform application website? That's probably an EF thing.
That's an EF question. My understanding is yes, something is happening. We're not building it, but we're working with partners to build drivers for other databases, not just EF, but Mongo and Postgres.
So would a way to phrase that be big and obvious stuff like that someone's thinking about?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, it'd be stupid to have something cross-platform and then there's only SQL Server to run the thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Cool. I know you can't give timelines, but if ASP.NET 1.0 was released, where will EF? He's saying EF7. EF7 is EF Core 1 now.
Correct.
That will happen at the same time. So EF and ASP.NET ship at the same time, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Well, his second part of the question is he's asking for a guess how long after that.
When SignalR comes.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to throw out numbers. I mean, we're not saying dates for very good reasons because we don't have dates internally even. Like
Yeah,
we're
because if we
still
say
gathering
one,
data.
which would be a lie, then
Right.
you'd be like, "Whoop, sorry, we moved it."
Again, yeah, it won't be 5 years, and it won't be it won't be 1 month. So I honestly don't know because the thing we're focused on right now is getting to a fantastic 1.0 RTM, which the scope is defined. We're not adding any scope to it, and we're trying very hard not to remove any from it because we think what we defined as the scope was the core minimum viable product for a reasonable 1.0 of something called ASP.NET. So.
All right, cool. I like it. Your blog is down right now.
That's right.
Seriously? That's amazing. John, will you do the questions while I reboot my blog?
Sure. Well, I mean, I can read them. I can't mark them answered.
All
So
right,
here's a
how about
question
that
from...
one? What do you think of Aurelia?
It's
Yeah.
up again. Your blog's up.
Are you serious?
It's working for me.
I just got an error. Nope,
Okay.
it's unavailable. Hit Control R.
Well, so
Working
Maxim's
for me.
asking, what do you think of Aurelia?
I have no
It's
opinion of Aurelia because I've never used it, so I'm not going to give opinions on things I've never used.
I like what I've looked at with it. I mean, it's kind of orthogonal to a lot of the stuff. It's front-end web dev, so it's going to work with any API back-end. I've been pretty happy with what I've looked at with it.
Could work fine with ASP.NET, as should all things like this.
Yep.
Clark asking, how's the perf work going?
Good. We have a much larger perf team engaged now, so we're doing more active work with the Tech Empower benchmarks because we actually want to, submit and be in that suite. And there's active perf and stress work going on in the lower levels as well as cross-plat. So lots of work going on. I haven't got any new numbers. The numbers that I referenced last time, 1.15 million for plain text on Windows, are still the same numbers. But I think it will get faster before we RTM, just because I know that there are fixes coming in for some things that will improve the perf. For example, turns out that we're not using IOCP on Windows with our current architecture due to a quirk in how libuv falls back and when we do multi-loop in Kestrel. And so we're actively working through trying to fix that, which will give us like another 15%. And then Ben is still doing Ben things. You got a PR merged into Core CLR into thread pool over the weekend, which reduced the allocations in the thread pool in Core CLR.
By like 25%.
And it went from 44 meg to 31 meg, I think, for his test. So there's still stuff going on. So, but it is probably fair to say that if anything, that it will benefit from the increased time. It may be that we will be able to do some more perf things that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. Perf is much less risk in terms like adding features always has the danger of feature creep and ripple effects of new APIs and those type of things, whereas just making existing stuff better, faster, harder, more stable, because you've got some portion of the team who isn't blocked by something that is currently blocking is something we can do to parallelize. So we may get a little bit more things faster, given a little bit more time.
Excuse me. I'm rebooting my blog. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. Okay, let me... so you can't push the buttons on theirs?
No, but I can read them. And they sort by the top. So Sakab asking if they can have... Oh, it just moved. Can they have type-safe configuration files? So we have Roslyn and TypeScript. Why can't config the...
Yeah, what about a project.ts or their project.json?
Well, that's not a config file. What do you mean by
type? He wants type safety in the things. So if you accidentally right now put in a quote around a number instead of the number, what's going to barf?
It won't compile.
It won't
Depends on what tool it is, right? So there is a schema. I mean, we are schema-driven. So our JSON, if you're talking about project JSON, I thought he was actually referring more to
actual config files.
Config files.
Can you have?
You can write a config provider for any file format you like.
Oh.
And also, I tend to use strongly typed classes for my configuration, which I populate from config files. So at least you are working with typed data in your application, and then you can choose how you want to verify the actual input to those things, whether there's environment variables or ini files or JSON files, whatever it might be. So
Cool.
That is a good idea. I like my ini files.
and remember, you can choose not to use config files at all. You can do all your config in code.
Being able to do it whatever type you like. I mean, it can be a table in a database. It can be whatever.
And that was a very purposeful design of the new config system, was that we didn't want something that was strongly bound to types in .NET. We wanted it to be much more flexible, so you can do things like have very simple config values flow from environment variables on your production server, as opposed to stuff that comes from files when you're working with source, and have them both be treated as the same logical sort of source of config. Nice and flexible for deploying to the cloud.
There's Christian Halang has put in a code as configuration. Can you grab that?
Sure.
Put that in the list, and and there were some questions earlier about where we're going to put the configuration and not the configuration, where we're going to put the links and community links and stuff like that. Jeff Fritz is watching, and he should be keeping track. We'll try to put them in a blog post as well as in the YouTube, and we are still actively looking at moving this over to Channel 9 in some way.
Oh, cool. Okay.
We'll make this.
Although we did get one piece of feedback on that will actually prevent some portion of our audience from being able to watch it.
Nope. So right now we're already preventing a large number of our audience.
Because it's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. So what we're going to do is have it hopefully in both places.
Oh, both. Okay. Because I think some people.
If you're in Iran or Cuba,
some
you
people
can't
are using tools to download them as like podcasts from the YouTube channel, and then other people are like, if it's not on Channel 9, I can't see it because it's not allowed through my firewall, company or country or otherwise.
The goal is for everyone to watch it whenever they feel like it.
Absolutely.
Cool.
And we'll make it available under Creative Commons so anyone can do what they like, right?
Yeah, no, we don't need remixes of this. Compliment, someone say thank you for putting Gulp into the new web templates. It's changed my view on how to build web apps. That's very nice. I noticed you guys are using an internal version of Mock.
We were. I think we sent the PR to them to
get. Are there any mocking frameworks available can use with ASP.NET Core?
So .NET, specifically the problem is using mocking frameworks against .NET Core, or Core CLR. The issue was most of them have a common dependency on Castle Windsor Dynamic Proxy, which hadn't moved to Core. Last time I looked at this was many, many, many months ago, and the work had started. I believe we sent the PR to Mock, or we worked with them or something to have Mock support it. I'd have to just go and look it up. I'm just talking off the cuff here. But effectively, most of the other mocking frameworks, like NSubstitute and RhinoMock and all those things, they tend to have this common dependency on Castle Windsor Dynamic Proxy. So once that's .NET Core, then everything else can be as well.
Cool. What's the best way to get session state in Core?
We have session state in Core.
So it's just not a problem?
As much as I don't like it.
Is your phone ringing? Is that Team Android?
That
sounds like?
So I just switched to my Gmail tab, and then it just popped up the call notification from when you called me at the beginning of this call. Nice. Because go. Yeah, no, session state, we have a new session API in ASP.NET Core, and it's there. So you can use it. We have providers for Redis and SQL. I'm not a huge fan of session state personally. I hate it, but people use it. I understand they use it, and it solves the problem for them. So we have it, and use it. Knock yourself out. I just have opinions from working in the industry for a long time, and I never liked it. So
not a fan, he says.
But it's there, and I can understand why some people use it.
All right. No judgment.
But I will judge you.
Is there any more renames going with Microsoft.extensions, .star? Has this been frozen at all?
No, there's no active work in renaming any of that stuff. Pretty much the names we have right now, as far as I'm aware, are what you'll stay. The only things that might possibly change are the tools. So like the EF command line tool and the user secrets tool and those things, the things that change from commands and DNX tools in .NET, those packages might go through a rename.
Okay. I have to go.
Okay.
That's
sorry.
Not a question.
I guess we'll leave this running. Is that okay?
Sure.
Sorry. The problem is, everyone, I have to pick up my kids, which is a good thing, but the questions always go longer than we thought they would go. So I will leave, and I'll be back later.
So I can read questions. I can't mark them, but I can read them.
Yeah, and I'll figure out a way to make you the admin later. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, cool. All right. Well, I mean, you can read through, but I'll just give me something to
I
do.
want you to have the job of remembering which ones I've answered and just feed them to me. Just spoon feed.
Okay. So is there an example of using OAuth, and they're asking for mainly Google with ASP.NET Core?
It's in the templates. So yeah, there is the security repo. If should have a sample, or the entropy repo if there isn't one in the security repo. But the templates still support if you do file new in RC1 and choose individual auth.
That's right.
The code gets emitted for at least part of the third-party auth providers, and I think even the docs might. The docs
Yeah,
might
so,
even cover that.
he went on in that, and he's asking, he says the one in the docs doesn't show how to handle the claims.
Oh, yeah, it may
So
not.
that's more advanced.
If you want to get custom claims, yeah. Then you should look at the repo or ask a question, and I apologize that it's not in the docs yet.
All right. Is there some special magic going on in Xproj? Is there any way to get a cproj file automatically add files without adding them to the project file? I'm not sure I follow that.
Yes, so they're referring to the fact that in Xproj you don't have to add the files to the project. So
yeah.
Technically you can do that in CSproj, but Visual Studio doesn't understand it. So you can go in,
right.
crack open your CSproj and put in a path, a wildcard path, but VS won't like it. So that's one of the value adds. It's one of the features of the new project model.
Okay. So yeah, like you're saying, it's exposing something that was already kind of possible, but not like understood.
Not first class. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Let me see. Can we create a new HTTP request and push it down the pipeline from inside the application for testing or a proxy?
Yeah, we have a test host. We have lots of examples of that in our own repos because we do our own testing that way. We have the error handler middleware, which lets you, when anything in the pipeline throws an error, it will reset and rerun the pipeline for a new URL, and you could look at the source code of that. So there's lots of ways that you could do that. Okay. Effectively, if you've got the request delegate, which is the entry point to the pipeline, you can create a request object and fire it through the pipeline.
All right. Another question, same person. I'm having a hard time in VS with a project consisting of several solutions with several projects referencing each other. Often, when I fetch new commits, everything breaks and I have to run dnu restore and restart everything. And he's suspecting it's project.lock.json.
Yeah, that's something we're working on. I think a lot of people have resorted to, when they're doing syncs from like Git, if closing the solution in Visual Studio first, then doing the pull, and then opening it up, and then so the Visual Studio will not try to restore things while Git is still overriding files on disk. Because what happens, right, is Visual Studio is looking at everything that is opened for changes, and if it sees a project JSON has changed, it'll immediately start to kick off a restore. But if you're doing that in different parts for different parts of your solution, then you may have restores that get backed up behind each other, which won't ultimately succeed until the very last one has run. So sometimes it can be easier to just close the solution, sync everything to where you want it to be, and then open it and then let it do the restore that way. But that is a scenario we care about, and with the new tooling, we're hoping to make that work a lot better.
Cool. If an application running under Kestrel crashes and something unrecoverable like a seg fault, is there some kind of automatic restart, or do you need your own service for that?
So you generally would use whatever you're using for front-end server. So if you're doing reverse proxying behind IIS or Nginx, then they both have that capability of monitoring the process that they launched and then relaunching it with fast failure recovery and all that type of stuff. If you're running it directly, then you have to look at what ran it. Like someone started the web server, right? Someone called blah.exe or whatever it is. And usually that's the thing that has to have the logic to monitor that process and determine if it failed in such a way that you should try restarting it.
Right. I mean, that's what you use a front-end host process for, right? Is to handle
and if you're not running a front end for whatever reason, then whatever you use to start up the process is the thing that would have to do that. Whether you have a second process that you use, or what's the thing that people use on Linux? It has a name.
A watchdog. I forget the.
There's a thing that a lot of people use. Systemd, is that it?
I can't remember.
That's what's on the top of my tongue. Someone in question.
There's a few of them that monitor. Okay, question. Can we get a value from JSON config as an entire JToken when the key path isn't complete? So they want to reconfig They want to get a J token, but they don't have the whole key path.
Well, the config API doesn't give you back J tokens at all. It just gives you back strings. So the config API is provider agnostic. So if you're reading a materialized configuration object, you have no access to the original sources for that configuration. Like the idea is that it gets filled and produces a materialized config, and then you use that. You can reload it from its sources. There's an API to do that. For example, if the JSON file changes, you can have that trigger a reload such that the config object is updated with the new values. But the config primitives that you get, which are like iConfiguration root and iConfiguration section and then values, those are the primitives you have, and they're all effectively string-based.
Which is good, right? Then you can change your config backend, you can test it, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. It's the lowest common denominator.
Yeah. Okay, I'm calling an MVC6 web API using cores from another app. All fine when returning 200 or 404, etc. But when I get an unhandled exception returning a 500, it doesn't have the expected access control origin header. Is there some global config or another way to get it?
So we have a cores middleware. You'll need to configure your cores middleware on the server endpoint. So you've got two things, right? You've got the server and you've got the thing calling the server. The other thing might be another server. Well, actually, it won't be. Cores only matters if you're doing it from a browser, right? Cross-origin resource sharing is a spec that browsers implement in order to protect against cross-site request forgery, cross-site request scripting, and those type of things. So if you have AJAX requests being made from a browser or other types of non-full page requests, then to your server application, your ASP.NET server, then you will need a cores policy in place if you're doing anything other than simple gets, basically, right? So you need to configure the cores middleware on your server that has the endpoint on it to successfully serve requests that are from browsers that are cross-origin that aren't simple requests. And now configuring that can be a little hard, but you'll read the core spec. It's not that bad. Like the core spec isn't that bad. You can read the W3C core spec to understand it, and then configure the cores middleware with the appropriate headers that you may be sending if you're sending custom headers or any headers that's outside the standard headers for a GET. And if you're doing custom verbs, you'll need to add those verbs in there as well. I'm not sure, I can't remember where response codes come into the spec, but again, it's covered in the middleware. So.
And it sounds like from the question, he's hitting the problem when he gets a 500 response. So the request is failing, so he's not serving up maybe that core.
So you have to make sure if you want to be able to serve errors from error middleware, the cores middleware has to be before the error handler middleware, right? Otherwise, the thing catching it will be there. It won't send the right headers, and right. So,
yeah,
cores is tricky. Like if a lot of people get tripped up on cores, they added the middleware and they go, "Why doesn't it work?" So, well, you have to configure it. You have to actually look at what you're doing and configure it correctly for the type of requests and the type of endpoints that you have. It's not automatic.
Okay. Question from Lenny: do you foresee a lot more API churn going forward, or are the APIs pretty stable at this point as far as breaking changes?
The APIs in the ASP.NET stack, I mean, that's really all I can talk to, are pretty stable. There's not, I can't really think of any areas as of now, if you were to look at the source code, that are likely to change. Most of those, if not all of them, are pretty stable now. The work is much more in packaging, installers, under the covers, make sure the end-to-end scenarios are what we want. Maybe the command line experience, tweaking some of the arguments and command names there, those type of things.
Cool. Hey, we're getting close to the end of these. Okay, question on a very specific issue, and so I think there's really two questions here. One is he says configuration, he's linking to a GitHub issue on configuration. He says configuration is only sees environment variables when deployed to Windows Server 2012 R2. So this is something opened issue 4 days ago. So he's asking if is somebody going to look at it? Like, how can you know if someone's going to look at it or work on it?
They'll update the issue.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was a long weekend, right? No one was here yesterday because of President's Day. So if no one's looked at it yet, it's because no one's been here the last 3 days.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, just a few left. Maxim asking, would it be a horrible idea to expose a token generation endpoint to a secure web API protected by cookie auth instead of using an identity server? So we went to token generation protected by cookie auth instead of identity server.
Well, we'd need a token. So we don't have a token generation server. That's what identity server is for. So we've chosen not to build one of those because we think the world has too many of those already. And so
and it's hard to do it right? I mean,
you have to do it correctly, right? And so I'm not going to say it's a terrible idea or not, but we're not doing it. It's outside the scope of what we're building. So our recommendation is people use identity server to create those tokens.
Okay, I see two more questions here. Azure App Service Auth does not seem to pass a principal to the core web app. Is there a way to make it work?
Azure App. Oh, is that the quick auth or whatever? Simple auth?
I'm guessing so.
Yeah, no. Simple auth, as I understand it currently, only works on sort of traditional ASP.NET applications, and we don't have a plan to support simple auth for 1.0. Is my current understanding. It's directly tied to how auth worked in ASP.NET 4.x.
Cool. Okay. Question here. Is it from Rob? Is it possible to have the build process create everything needed for the web application in one directory?
Yes.
I can see where I can have binaries and the artifacts, but none of the static content or CS/HTML files are there. So he wants to package up his app, right?
Well, hang on. Does he want all the output in one folder, or does he want a package? Those are different things.
Yeah.
So
let me see.
This is one of the things that we're working through right now, which is the project model. When you publish a project from the .NET CLI, the default model will be that you publish to a folder, you get a bunch of output, but you don't get any of the stuff in the output that's assumed to be on the server already. Because it's assumed that on the server you have installed a shared runtime, effectively a redist, okay, of the core CLR for that platform and what we're calling the .NET Standard Library. And so that reduces the amount of stuff you have to have in your output folder, which means it's less stuff that you have to push up to the server, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's what we're working through right now. And so that will be the default story. There will also be the ability, though, to say, turn the dial and say, give me everything I need to be a standalone application, which is put everything in the output folder, so it's going to be a lot bigger. Bit like what we had with DNU publish when you passed in a runtime, -- runtime. And then you can get everything in the output folder, including the exe that's required to boot the app and everything native and managed and everything in there to run. So that requires you to be platform specific because we need to know what executable to be put in. Is it an executable for a Mac? Is it executable for Linux? Is it executable for Windows? And then all the native dependencies as well. So by doing that, you make your app non-portable in that the output is non-portable because you have to tell us where you want to publish. But that's exactly what we're working through right now.
Cool. I think we got two more here. What is the status on HTTP www-authenticate with basic digest NTLM auth on Kestrel?
Certainly not NTLM for 1.0 or digest. We're not shipping those. Basic auth, I can't remember. Honestly, I'd have to go and check. I'm not sure that we have basic at the moment. If we don't, then it's very unlikely that we will for 1.0, but I'd have to go and ask someone.
Okay.
Or I'd have to go and look in the code, see if we have a basic auth. I don't think we do. I don't think we have a basic auth middleware.
Okay. Okay, let's make this the last one here. What samples would you suggest to look at for learning the latest upcoming bits? Is Music Store up to date?
No.
Okay.
Kind of.
Yeah, I looked actually. There's been a lot of commits lately.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, it's not a good time. I would wait. You could, the end-to-end isn't there yet, and so you would only get fragments. And so, like, if the context of the question is I want to learn about the next release, it's not ready for you to look at with that type of viewpoint yet. You really have to be like there are members of the community that are knee deep in it right now who are a little more plugged in, can understand it. But if you're still working with DNX stuff, I would wait until it's a little more cooked, and we say to you, hey, here's a install you can go and get, and a bunch of docs and stuff to go along with it.
You know, another one that I really think is kind of a hidden gem people don't think of, in the MVC repository, there's a samples folder. And there's a lot of good like app-specific stuff that exercises specific. And what's nice about those is they're chunked out by feature a little bit. So you can see like a sample that's specific to a certain case.
Yeah.
I'm still seeing a few trickle in, but I think we've hit kind of the main ones. I'm ready to call it here.
Okay.
So I guess you can do a dramatic zoom out.
I can.
And then I just hang up, and I guess the call just stays running, and people just watch Hanselman's face.
I guess that's how it works. We'll find out. Thanks,
All
everyone.
right, let's do it.
Zooming.
Goodbye.